Welcome to How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. We're here to chat about humane leadership in a way that's real and relatable, tackling work life challenges and offering practical advice to navigate tough decisions. Whether you're leading a team or navigating your own career, we got you covered. I'm Roberto Torres, is a startup engineering leader, and with me is Chris Ollerton, a Fortune 100 IT lead. We'll dive into the real world stuff, share experiences, and offer guidance on leading with compassion while keeping your career on track. Today, we will discuss how to spot when you're training your replacement and, as a human leader, what to do about it. Hi, sir. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good, Roberto. I hope you're doing well, and we'll have some interesting insights on this if this has happened to you. It's absolutely happened to me.
Well, it hasn't happened to me, but I want to know everything that happened to you.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I've observed it where I noticed it happening to others. I've noticed it when I've had, as a humane leader, unfortunately, when there are layoffs, you cannot tell people they're going to be laid off. And I've had to try and keep it secret to have one of my employees train their replacement. And then when it happened to me, it was so obvious. I'm just like, all right, I know what's going on here. Obviously, it's not a great thing to have happen to you. I was at a stage in my career where I was ready to move on, so it was psychologically different. But but there are very, very telltale signs, both whether you're the employee that it's happening to, whether you're the humane leader that has to try and make it as humane as possible for the parties involved. So one of the things I think that you need to watch for is, are there a high number of requests for documentation? This is one of the very first signs. So before you even start to have to train somebody or talk to anybody, if your leader is now asking you to create more extensive documentation, you do a certain job, you do certain processes, you analyze things certain ways. If your boss or even your humane leader starts to ask you to create additional documentation that goes above and beyond what you would think, well, gosh, anybody who even semi knows how to do this doesn't need more documentation than this, but now they're asking for even more step-by-step processes to get things done, it's very likely you're going to be training your replacement soon. And that's because what's probably happening, and this is maybe more often in really large companies, they're probably sending your job to a lower cost region, right? So whether you're in the United States or Mexico or France or England or the UK, whatever, everybody's got some place where your job can be done for less. Right? Maybe in the future, it'll be AI even doing your job for less. But you need to train the AI via very specific steps, right? Because if you give AI steps to follow, it's going to follow them exactly. And maybe in your job, sequence is important. If you get one of those steps wrong, the AIs maybe won't catch that and will do the exact same set of sequences. Well, same thing with you sending your job overseas to low-cost labor that doesn't understand the background of what your job is or what you're doing. They won't recognize that sequence is important to coming to the right conclusion. So what I've had to do with employees that I've been told, okay, you need to get, let's say, Roberto's job steps fully documented because we're going to send this role to India. I've had to tell what we call in English, little white lies. I have to lie a little bit. And I generally, as a humane leader, hate having to lie to employees. Now, sometimes you can't tell the truth, right? They ask, am I being laid off? And you have to say, no, not at this time, which is true. but a kind of a white lie, because you know that they're very likely going to get laid off in 3 months once all this stuff is documented. So you have to do things like that. And I never liked doing it, but what I had to do to get the job done is to tell a little white lie. And it's same kind of white lies that were told to me too, right? You know, that you know, your job's secure for now. They would, you know, put that tag onto the end. So when you see these signs, you know, do your best job, right? You know, doing the best job at documenting those things gives you the best opportunity to potentially find a different role in the company. But when you see these signs, I would absolutely have in the back of your mind that your job may be at risk. Your role of you doing these specific tasks is probably going away. And think about, what do you want to do? You may have weeks, you may have months. I had months when this started to happen. So you could start to look at what other roles are posted in the company. What, do you want to stay in the company, or do you want to go someplace else? Those are personal decisions that you have to weigh, but the signs will usually be pretty clear. If you're doing a lot of documentation and spending way more time on documentation than you ever did before, you're probably getting replaced.
Okay. And tell me, what were the emotions that you were coping with? I imagine that it was a lot of frustration, but how are you coping with this?
Well, certainly when it happened when I was younger, I was disappointed, I guess is the way I would put it. I'm like, I thought I was doing a really good job. I thought this role would last longer. But in knowing the company's philosophy of continual pressure on costs and an openly public statement they would say in town halls is to move tasks to low cost regions. I mean, this was an open strategy in the company. Again, very large company looking to reduce costs as a way to boost earnings all the time, which is understandable, efficiency, right? I can get the same work done for half the cost or a third the cost, then you should do that as responsibility to your shareholders. So the first time it happened, I was very disappointed, but I also knew that I wanted to seek other things. So it was initially very kind of not depressing, but sad. I'm sad that this is ending because I really liked doing it. But it was a good motivator to say, you know, really, if I'm going to succeed and stay in this huge company a long time, I need to move around. Look at what my peers who are successful, what have they done? And they had moved on sometimes as quickly as in a year and a half. They'd do a role, and within a year and a half, they were moving on to something else. Well, the culture where I came from, people stayed in roles 4 or 5 years to really master them, really be the number one person in that role before they would move on. That wasn't how the larger company that acquired us operated. They wanted people that knew a little bit about a lot of areas, completely different mindset. And so as I kind of got that wake-up call of documenting all this stuff and realizing, holy cow, I may be on my way out, I immediately started watching the postings. And because I knew my job was fairly complex, I knew this wasn't a 2-week early warning shot. This was, going to be months. I ended up finding something else, and they were able to be more open than with me about, well, we're going to move this work that you're doing to India, so teach your replacement. So then they didn't need to hide it that I was, because I was leaving for a different role in another part of the company. They said, okay, we need 1 month of transition, so you can train your replacement for a month and still be available to help them if they don't fully master it in that 1 month. So, it really kind of turned a sad situation for me into a very positive, a new role. That was great. And the company wins because I'm still available to answer questions. So even if my documentation isn't perfect, if the person who takes over the role doesn't fully understand it, they could talk to me about it still, because I'm within the company and still a resource. If I exited the company and went to another role, I'm not going to answer any questions unless they paid me to answer questions, right? So So the first time, very positive experience. When I've had to do it with other people, meaning getting them to document it, my emotions on it were very sad. I always hated having to try and position the person out of the company, right? It's you're getting them to document, and they're going to have to leave the company unless they realize themselves that they're at risk and look for other roles in the company. So as part of my regular routine with my employees was always to be, are you interested in other roles? I mean, this would literally be a conversation we might have every 2 to 3 months, even though nothing was happening to their job, because I knew at any time, because of this stated strategy of moving things to lower cost regions, I frequently had discussions with employees about, well, what do you want to do next? Have you done some self-learning, some of the courses that we have available for free? Have you invested some time in that to prepare for that next role you're interested in? Have you looked? Has there been anything you saw? Do I need to contact somebody? It's not that I want to get rid of you, Roberto. I want you to stay. But these roles turn over a lot. And, so I'd say everyone in my team always knew that at any moment, their role could be at risk. But that was a culture of the company, right? You just you lived under the guillotine, you lived under the axe that your job could be eliminated at any moment, all the time. Very stressful. And you really had to kind of decide, is it worth it to you to stay under that stress, or no, this stress is not for me, look for something outside the company. But if you have open and honest discussions long before the real event is coming with your employees, you can be way more honest with them, right? If you're not facing a layoff, I know I don't need to lay off Roberto. I can talk to Roberto about, how it's done, what are some of the signs, what I would recommend you do, Roberto, even though you report to me, right? I can teach you all those things, but as soon as HR comes to me and says, here's the confidential layoff list, Roberto's on it, you need to prepare to lay him off in 3 months. Now I can't have those discussions with you, right? Now I got to keep secrets because that's my job as the leader. Even as a humane leader, when HR tells you there are secrets, we're diverging, we're going to sell off part of the company. We're acquiring a company, but they got 10 Robertos, so we're getting rid of ours and taking the Robertos from the new company we're acquiring. All those secrets, once HR tells you here's the things you have to keep in confidence, then I can't talk to you openly about situations like that. So you kind of have to be, again, company culture wise, be aware of that and train your employees, if they're ignorant of the culture, to be aware of that culture. That's a humane thing for you to do, so they don't get blindsided. Because if they get completely blindsided by the fact that their job's going overseas to a lower cost region, the lower cost region, let's say from Mexico, might be to the Philippines or Vietnam or to India. So everywhere is at risk. It's just, how is your company doing it, and do you recognize the signs in your company? I can tell you in our company, anyone who is watching and paying attention in town halls, where the CEO speaks, or town halls where the CIO speaks, they all knew that this was the company philosophy because it would be openly stated. Our strategy is to move 10% to a lower cost region this year. It's right there.
Yeah.
Can't miss it. Can't miss it. Now you have to detect, is it you or not?
Yeah. And what I'm reading over here was that that you created, you and for your team members, resilience in some way, even though they weren't asking for it. Neither did you. When you noticed this, the thing was, okay, what should I do? Should I be sad and be in my own universe and don't act, or move on? And you learn from this bad experience to move on to a better position. You were lucky because you weren't in a big company. In a small company, in a startup, there is no space to move on. Either you stayed with that, until you're going to get fired in this scenario, or you have to move on to another company. Now, that it could be either a startup or a big one, but in the end, resilience is something that you created and you nurtured to you and your team. And I totally understand. You cannot lie. We cannot lie. But if it's mandatory, we will. It's more than important. The thing is, if we don't, we're going to get fired because we didn't follow instructions. And that's something that it isn't going to happen. It's something related to the business. I understand. And let me tell you a little bit about startups. In startup, you don't train your replacement. You you're going to get fired, and your replacement is going to be the following day. That happened to me once. But in a startup, usually since you're gaining a lot of knowledge based on the multiple hats that you're wearing depending on the situation, sometimes rather than training a replacement or being fired, you're moving on to another position in which they tell you, we see a strength of you in this department. We're going to move you over there. And then maybe one of your reports we're going to put on to a higher level of responsibility. And with that in mind, that is something good. But usually, when you are in a startup, you must understand that change is often. You have to be really, really aware of that. And that will be something I like with the topic that we're discussing today. But well, I have another question. Okay, um, you did a lot of documentation, and you noticed this because it wasn't something common to do all this documentation. But did you have reports at that time? If you did, what did you told them? To you, did you express something to them of this, or it happened and they found out suddenly?
Um, it really kind of depended on the relationship with the direct reports. So meaning, in various stages of my career, at one point I had reports that I had already worked with and known for 15 years, right? So a report like that, you might share more personal insights with. You might say, I think they may be moving my leadership role out or combining it with somebody else because I'm doing this documentation. But if they were more, what I guess I would call regular or more junior direct reports where you don't have that kind of rapport, I wouldn't disclose anything about it. It really it was a very subjective decision based on relationships. Because again, the cultures were so different between where I started and where, once we were acquired, that corporate culture. So, for example, before we were acquired, it was very common to go to other employees' weddings, their kids' weddings. It literally was like working in a family business. I never worked in a family business, but I imagine that if you worked in a family business that had 500 employees, it's probably very common for those employees to get invited to other employees' weddings or other employees' kids' weddings even. So very common. When we moved into this bigger, huge corporation, never once did I ever think I would get invited to any of their weddings or any of their kids' weddings. And that remained to be true because there just wasn't the same kind of rapport or culture and you just weren't going to know these people that long because none of them stayed around that long. In our original company, we had this, what was called the 25-year club. And there were people in the 25-year club that had been in the club for 20 years, meaning 45 years of working for the company, right? Totally different There's no such thing in the bigger company because most of those employees, it was rare to see somebody that had worked there more than 7 years. Rare, very rare. When they would hear that I'd been there 30 years plus, you'd see shock on their face. Like, how long? What? Unheard of, completely unheard of. And versus, at UOP, it was like, well, 30 years, you're just getting started. You're a rookie at 30 years.
Wow.
So, I think that when you have you have to make a judgment call as a humane leader. What kind of rapport do you have with some of these direct reports? It is a confidential matter when there's a layoff. No matter what your relationship is, you can't tell them. But if it's you that it's happening to, if you're close enough with some of those direct reports, you can share suspicions. And you have to make a judgment call on if you're close enough with them to share that. If you think you're going to get laid off and you're close enough with them, I'd share it with them, I would say. I did on my one where it was kind of negative, but I moved on to another role. I shared it with them because I wanted them to be ready to potentially apply if they posted my role, or be prepared to move on if you didn't like who the new boss was going to be, because it was probably going to be a boss, not a humane leader.
Yeah.
So if you're close enough, then I would share my suspicions. But in a layoff situation where the humane leader has to lay off part of the team and get the documentation out of them, unfortunately it's the rule is you cannot share it, and I did not. It's unfortunate.
Understood. Yeah, and the thing is also maybe some of your team reports would be as mature as to understand what's going on and how to handle it.
Correct.
The thing, even though you might, well, not you, but someone might be a boss or a humane leader, you must understand that people wouldn't understand, because when you're doing that, where you're mentioning the harsh truth, they won't see it as your way. They will see it in their own eyes. And that might be really bad for this situation. So, as you mentioned, giving white little lies is much better. In the end, you're following instructions. You must comply with them. Otherwise, you will be in problem, you and the other person. So it has to be like that. And I understand it's a tough one. I haven't been, but if I would have been or would be, I would add as you did. Yeah. Well. Okay. I think we're 20 minutes now of this episode, but I don't think that there is something else. Do you think that we should talk more?
Other than, just always be aware of what the culture is and what's going on around you. Listen to the town halls. If you're in a big company, listen to the public meetings that are given to investors, and you'll know if you're at risk of something like this happening, and then just listen for the signs. If you're creating more documentation, if they literally just even ask you to start training somebody, you need to start thinking about what your options are, because you're probably going to be replaced.
Yeah, and with the startups, I will do suggest that in the all hands meeting, you have to look at the numbers. Are we getting to the number of users that we had to that we are aiming for? What about the numbers? Are we getting into the revenue that we're expecting to? And from all hands to be really aware. When we are not reaching that, a change is going to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, great, man. I think it was an amazing episode. I trust that our audience will see it as well. Now we'll see you next week.